The Legitimists are royalists in France who adhere to the rights of dynastic succession of the descendants of the elder branch of the Bourbon dynasty, which was overthrown in the 1830 July Revolution. They reject the claim of the July Monarchy of 1830 to 1848, whose king was a member of the junior Orléans line of the Bourbon dynasty. Following the movement of ultra-royalists during the Bourbon Restoration of 1814, the Legitimists came to form one of the three main right-wing factions in France, which was principally characterized by its counter-revolutionary views. The other two right-wing factions are, according to historian René Rémond, the Orléanists and the Bonapartists. The Legitimists hold that the King of France must be chosen according to the traditional rules of succession based in the Salic law. When the direct line of Charles X became extinct in 1883 with the death of his grandson Henry, Count of Chambord, the most senior heir to the throne under these traditional rules was one Count of Montezon, a descendant of Louis XIV via his grandson Philip V of Spain. History: the Bourbon Restoration. Following the Bourbon Restoration in 1814, a strongly restricted census suffrage sent to the Chamber of Deputies an ultra-royalist majority in 1815 to 1816 and from 1824 to 1827. Called as such because they were more royalist than the king, the Ultras were thus the dominant political faction under Louis XVIII and Charles X, opposed to the constitutional monarchy of Louis XVIII and to the limitation of the sovereign's power. They hoped to restore the ancient regime and cancel the rupture created by the French Revolution. By the same token, Ultras opposed all liberal, republican and democratic ideas, while Louis XVIII hoped to moderate the restoration of the ancient regime in order to make it acceptable to the population. The Ultras would never abandon the dream of an integral restoration, even after the 1830 July Revolution, which set the Orleanist branch on the throne and the Ultras back to the castles in the countryside and to private life. Their importance during the Restoration was in part due to electoral laws which largely favored them. Louis XVIII's first ministers, who were included Talleyrand, the Duc de Richelieu and Decazes, were replaced by the Chamber introuvable dominated by the Ultras. Louis XVIII finally decided to dissolve this chaotic assembly, but the new liberals who replaced them were no easier to govern. After the 1820 assassination of the Duc de Berry, the ultra-reactionary son of the Comte d'Artois, and a short interval during which the Duc de Richelieu governed, the Ultras were back in government, headed by the Comte de Villiers. The death in 1824 of the moderate Louis XVIII emboldened the Ultra faction. In January 1825, Villiers' government passed the Anti-Sacrilege Act, which punished by death the theft of sacred vessels. This anachronistic law was in the end never applied and repealed in the first months of Louis Philippe's reign. The Ultras also wanted to create courts to punish radicals, and passed laws restricting freedom of the press. After the 1830 July Revolution replaced the Bourbons with the more liberal Orleanist branch, the Ultras' influence declined, although it survived until at least the 16th of May 1877 crisis in 1879, and even longer. They softened the views and made the restoration of the House of Bourbon the main aim. From 1830 on they became known as Legitimists. Legitimists under the July Monarchy. During the July Monarchy of 1830 to 1848, when the junior Orleanist branch held the throne, the Legitimists were politically marginalized, many withdrawing from active participation in political life. The situation was complicated before 1844 by debate as to who the legitimate king was. Charles X and his son Louis-Antoine the Dauphin had both abdicated during the 1830 revolution in favor of Charles's young grandson. Henry Comte de Chambord, until the deaths of Charles X and his son in 1836 and 1844, respectively. Many Legitimists continued to recognize each of them in turn as the rightful king, ahead of Chambord. Legitimists under the Second Republic and the Second Empire. The fall of King Louis-Philippe I in 1848 led to a strengthening of the Legitimist position. Although the childlessness of Chambord weakened the hand of the Legitimists, they came back into political prominence during the Second Republic. Legitimists joined with Orléanists to form the Party of Order, which dominated Parliament from the elections of May 1849 until Bonaparte's coup on December 2, 1851. They formed a prominent part of Odilon Barrett's ministry from December 1848 to November 1849, and in 1850 were successful in passing the Fallow Law, which brought the Catholic Church back into secondary education. Through much of this time there was discussion of fusion with the Orleanist party so that the two could effect a monarchical restoration. This prospect prompted several sons of Louis-Philippe to declare their support for Chambord, but fusion was not actually achieved, and after 1850 the two parties again diverged. The most committed Orleanists supported the candidacy of Louis-Philippe's third son, the Prince de Joinville, for the presidency, while the Legitimists largely supported allowing Bonaparte to run for a second term. In spite of this support for Bonaparte's ambitions, they opposed his scheme to restore universal suffrage in the last months of 1851, and the leaders were, like those of the Orleanists, arrested during Bonaparte's coup. The period of the Second Empire saw the Legitimists once again cast out of active political life. Legitimists under the Third Republic. Nevertheless, the Legitimists remained a significant party within elite opinion, attracting support of the larger part of the ancient regime aristocracy. After the Siege of Paris in 1870 and the 1871 Paris Commune, the Legitimists returned for one final time to political prominence. The 8th of February 1871 elections, held under universal manhood suffrage, gave the National Assembly of France a royalist majority supported by the provinces, while all the Parisian deputies were Republican. This time, the Legitimists were able to agree with the Orleanists on a program of fusion, largely because of the growing likelihood that the Count of Chambord would die without children. The liberal Orleanists agreed to recognize Chambord as king, and the Orleanist claimant himself, Louis-Philippe Albert d'Orléans, Count of Paris, recognized Chambord as head of the French royal house. In return, Legitimists in the assembly agreed that, should Chambord die childless, Philippe d'Orléans would succeed him as king. Unfortunately for French monarchism, Chambord's refusal to accept the tricolour as the flag of France and to abandon the fleur-de-lis, symbol of the ancient regime, made restoration impossible until after his death in 1883, by which time the monarchists had long since lost the parliamentary majority due to the 16th of May 1877 crisis. The death of Chambord effectively dissolved the party Legitimist as a political force in France. Affected by sinistrisme, few conservatives explicitly called themselves right-wing during the Third Republic. It became a term associated with the counter-revolution and anti-republican feelings, and by the 1900s was reserved for radical groups. Those Legitimists who had rallied to the Republic in 1893, after the Comte de Chambord's death 10 years before, still called themselves Droit Constitutional et Républicain, but they changed their name in 1899, and entered the 1902 elections under the name Action Libérale. By 1910, the only group which openly claimed dissent from the right wing gathered only nostalgic royalists, and from 1924 1934 on the term right-wing practically vanished from the parliamentary rights glossary. By this time, the vast majority of Legitimists had retired to the country chateau and abandoned the political arena. Although the Action Française remained an influential movement throughout the 1930s, its motivations for the restoration of monarchy were quite distinct from older Legitimists' views, and More's instrumental use of Catholicism set them at odds. Thus, Legitimists participated little in the political events of the 1920s and 1930s, in particular in the 6th of February 1934 riots organized by far-right leagues. The royalist aristocrats clearly distinguished themselves from the new ultra-right, influenced by the emerging movements of fascism and Nazism. However, Legitimists joined More's in celebrating the fall of the Third Republic after the 1940 Battle of France as a divine surprise, and many of them entered Pétain's Vichy administration as a golden opportunity to impose a reactionary program in occupied France. Legitimists under Vichy and after World War II. Legitimists returned to prominence during Vichy France, according to historian René Rémond's studies of the right-wing factions in France. Some would also support the OAS during the Algerian War. Marcel Lefebvre's Society of St. Pius X, founded in 1970, especially in France, shares aspects with the Legitimist movement, according to Rémond. As of 2006, some remain strongly attached to the traditionalist wing of the Catholic Church. Such Legitimists are strongly opposed to the proposed European Constitution and anything else perceived as threatening the independence of France. Among French Legitimists there is diversity of opinion. Some tend to gather around traditionalist Catholic places, such as the Saint Nicolas du Chardonnet Church in Paris, or around far-right parties such as Jean-Marie Le Pen's Front National de Villiers movement pour la France. Carlism, a remnant known as the Blancachers d'Espagne, by repudiating Philip V's renunciation of the French throne as ultra-vires and contrary to the fundamental French monarchical law, upheld the rights of the eldest branch of the Bourbons, represented as of 1883 by the Carlist pretender to the Spanish throne. This group was initially minuscule, but began to grow larger after World War II due both to the political leftism of the Orléanist pretender Henry, Comte de Paris, and to the active efforts of the claimants of the elder line, Jaime, Duke of Segovia, the disinherited second son of Alfonso XIII of Spain, and his son, Alfonso, Duke of Anjou and Cadiz, to secure legitimist support, such that by the 1980s, the elder line had fully reclaimed for its supporters the political title of Legitimists. This means that the current Legitimist claimant is the Spanish-born Louis Alphonse de Bourbon, styled Duc d'Anjou, whom the French Legitimists consider to be the de jure king of France under the name Louis XX. A 1987 attempt by the Orléanists heir to contest Louis Alphonse's use of the Anjou title and to deny him use of the plain coat of arms of France was dismissed by the French courts in March 1989 for lack of jurisdiction. The Duc d'Anjou, a French citizen through his paternal mother, is generally recognized as the senior legitimate representative of the House of Capet. Dynastic arguments. The legitimist arguments on the succession to the French throne is based on the fundamental laws of the ancient regime which was formed in the early centuries of the Capetian monarchy. According to these rules, the succession to the throne is hereditary, passing by primogeniture in combination with the Salic law. The king must also be Catholic. Unlike the other requirements, which are fixed, this can be overcome by conversion. Among the further tenets of the legitimist position of the following: continuity of the crown. Upon the death of a monarch, his heir automatically and immediately becomes king, without the need of any formal act of investiture, and even if political circumstances would not allow him to actually take power. Unavailability of the crown. The crown is not the personal property of the king, therefore, nobody, not even the king himself, can alter the line of succession, through an act of abdication or renunciation, or by appointing an heir of his own choosing. This argument is crucial for the Legitimists regarding the continuing validity of the rights of succession of the Spanish line of Philip V and his descendants. According to this view, Philip's renunciation of his rights of succession in France in the Treaty of Utrecht of 1713 was null and void, and therefore his descendants still retain their claim to the French throne ahead of the Orléans line. It has been a point of contention within the Legitimist camp to what extent French nationality constitutes a precondition for royal succession, while adherents of the Spanish line argue that princes of foreign nationality can still succeed to the French crown. Others hold that French nationality of both the claimant and his ancestors is a requirement. List of Legitimist claimants of French throne. Those Legitimists who did not accept the Orléanist line as the successors of Chambord argued that the renunciation of the French throne by Philip V of Spain, second grandson of Louis XIV, was invalid, and that in 1883 the throne had passed to Philip V's male heirs. This line had also lost the Spanish throne in favor of the non-Salic heiress Isabella II, and were known as the Carlist pretenders in Spain. The French claim was reunited with that of the Isabelline Spanish line when the Carlist branch died out in 1936. Though Alfonso XIII of Spain had by that time been dethroned by the Second Spanish Republic, the French and Spanish claims separated again at Alfonso's death. His eldest surviving son Infante Jaime renounced his claim to the Spanish throne due to physical disability and, some years later, asserted a claim to the French succession based on legitimist principles. The present French legitimist claimant is descended from Jaime, while the present King of Spain is descended from his younger brother, Don Juan. In the 1870s, the rival Legitimist and Orléanist claimants agreed, for the sake of the French monarchy, to end the rivalry. Philippe d'Orléans, the Comte de Paris and grandson of Louis-Philippe I, accepted the prior claim to the throne of the Comte de Chambord. Chambord, who remained childless, in turn acknowledged that Philippe would claim the right to succeed him as heir, and after his death many Legitimists accepted the descendants of Philippe as the rightful pretender. Those who accept the Legitimist Orléanist line consider that Philip V of Spain and his descendants validly renounced the rights to the French throne in the Peace of Utrecht, and that the Treaty of Utrecht blocks the right to the crown of France from passing through the line. According to this point of view, the proper line follows the one above from Louis XVI through Chambord, but thereafter follows the Orléanist line, from Philippe d'Orléans to the present French line electoral results. These are the results for broadly legitimist parties in French national elections. Notes in the Conservatives group. In the Party of Order,